Chapter 2. A Voice in the Rain. Twilight bled into a starless dark. Todd shielded his torch with a cupped hand, the flame hissing as raindrops sizzled against the pitch. On his back, the professor huddled deeper beneath the wide brim of his hat. The ground had already softened to a greedy mud that tried to claim Todd's boot with every step.
As if things weren't grim enough.
Todd cursed under his breath. Then, through the drumming of the rain, another sound came, a voice from the darkness, chanting in a tongue that slid like oil over the ear.
Vorantok, Ishmal, Gurzad min Hail.
Todd froze, his head snapping toward the sound. He whispered a single, urgent word.
Professor.
There was a tense silence from his back. He could feel the leather of the rucksack stretch, a sign of the professor's profound concentration, of a mental library being ransacked only to come up empty. Finally, the dry voice came, laced with an awe that bordered on fear.
It is unknown, Todd. Utterly unknown.
Orienting himself toward the voice, Todd saw a path appear, its dim light a sudden escape from the oppressive dark. It was an easy path, a clear route that beckoned them forward. The voice pulled at their curiosity like a frayed stitch, begging to be unraveled.
A discovery like this could be the key,
The professor murmured, his academic thirst overriding his fear.
We must find its source.
Todd's gut twisted, but he nodded. They stepped from the sucking mud onto a strangely resilient moss. With each step, it felt less like plant life and more like soft, cool flesh under his boots. The dense canopy above swallowed the sound of the storm, plunging them into a profound, listening silence that was somehow more menacing. The illusion of safety was a potent lure, a quiet lie they chose to believe, even as instinct screamed at them to turn back. The voice echoed again, closer now, its words a chilling fusion of languages, both known and not.
Shadows oblitus with fractus mirrors, Krauge tacit unmade, Aranos stel nomina silentium.
The air thrummed, and the whispers intensified, worming their way directly into their minds. It wasn't just sound, it was a pressure, a force that sought to pry open the locks of their thoughts. Visions of crumbling star charts and whispers of cosmic truths coiled around their own logic, a tantalizing poison that promised everything if they would only keep walking. The path twisted with a disturbing fluidity, leading them ever deeper. Finally, it ended. Not in a clearing, but at the sheer, black edge of a cliff. The sheltering canopy vanished as if it had never been. The rain became a violent downpour, and the wind howled a mournful cry that harmonized with the unsettling whispers behind them. They turned. A bolt of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the scene in a searing, brilliant flash. A nightmare of flesh writhed before them, a rolling tide of living tissue that shambled where the path had been. It was a blasphemous mound, its surface a tapestry of horrors, dozens of human-like eyes, weeping a thin black fluid, stared in every direction. Between them, mouths with lips peeled back over needle-like teeth opened and closed, each one uttering a different syllable of that maddening language in a wet, sloppy chorus. Todd and the professor were trapped. Behind them, the cliff and the storm. Before them, a gazing mound of flesh that sang a mad song of unmaking. The wind howled like a hungry beast, clawing at the tattered edges of Todd Fancypants' robes. Below, the sea churned in a black, frothing rage, promising a swift, cold end. The cliff face itself was a jagged, broken tooth of the earth, offering no purchase, no escape. They were trapped, pinned between the abyss and the mass of mouths. The mass of mouths pulsed with an unholy light, its form a shifting mass of eyes and mouths that never stopped moving. Each mouth oozed a different, impossible sound. The hiss of burning ice, the wet slap of a heart against stone, the high-pitched whine of a saw blade cutting bone. These sounds didn't just assault the ears, they wormed their way into the mind, rewriting the very laws of thought. Todd's hands flew to his ears, but it was no use. The sounds were inside him now, blooming like black flowers in his brain. His eyes rolled back, and a thick, black ichor began to weep from the corners. He wasn't Todd anymore. He was a puppet, strung up by the mass of mouths' maddening litany. The storm raged around them, a black canvas slashed with jagged streaks of lightning. Each flash illuminated the mass of mouths' obscene form, and for a heartbeat, Todd could see the slick, glistening trails of saliva that stretched between its many mouths, catching the light like strands of venom. Every eye on the massive mouth's surface, from the tiny bloodshot pinpricks to the large milky orbs, was fixed on Todd and the professor. It was a gaze that felt impossibly ancient, predatory, and utterly devoid of anything human. The mass of mouths knew what was coming, and in those countless eyes there was a terrible, patient hunger. A snarl ripped through Todd's throat, but it wasn't his. It was the mass of mouths' sound, echoing from the madness blooming in his mind. His eyes, now completely black, locked onto Professor Pocketbottom. It wasn't Todd looking out. It was something else, something ancient and hungry. A thin line of black saliva stretched from the corner of his mouth, and his teeth were bared in a rictus grin that had no humor, no humanity. With a guttural roar that wasn't his own, Todd lifted the professor as easily as if he were a rag doll. Professor Pocketbottom's eyes widened in disbelief, his spectacles flashing in the lightning as he reached out a desperate leather strap. Then, with a sickening heave, Todd threw him. The professor's scream was swallowed by the storm, and the mass of mouths' wet, eager sounds. Pain flared in Professor Pocketbottom's left pocket, where he'd hit the ground. He scrabbled backward, his straps sinking into the cold, gritty mud at the cliff's verge. Loose stones skittered over the edge, their clatter devoured by the roaring sea below.
Todd,
He choked out, the name a shard of glass in his throat.
by all the sacred arts, fight it.
His plea wasn't just to his friend, but to the memory of the man who was now gone, replaced by the slack-jawed statue before him. But Todd remained impossibly still, a sentinel of madness against the flashing storm. His mouth hung open, unnaturally wide, and from his throat came a faint, wet whisper. Not words, but a blasphemous mimicry of the thing's chorus, the sound of static and slick, popping cartilage. The creature was done with him, a tool used and discarded. Ignoring the wizard's empty shell, the mass of mouths began to move. It wasn't a crawl or a slither, but a wet, dragging surge, a peristaltic ripple that churned the flesh and mouths across its body. A sound like thick slurry being sucked through a drain accompanied its advance. Every one of its countless eyes, now gleaming with a ravenous victory, remained locked on the professor. It was a singular, soul-crushing gaze that promised not a quick death, but a symphony of consumption.
Todd, please.
The professor's voice was a raw, useless thread against the storm and the creature's ceaseless drone. He was screaming at a hollowed-out shell. The hope he'd clung to finally fractured, leaving only the cold certainty of his own impending doom. Todd took a lurching, unsteady step that brought his heels to the very edge of the precipice. His gaze never left the pulsing multiform thing, a look of rapt, devotional awe on his face. The alien syllables were no longer a broken echo. They were scratched from his throat with a horrifying clarity, his human larynx struggling to form the impossible shapes of the sound.
Vorentok, Ishmal.
The words were wet and sharp, punctuated by clicks of the tongue against teeth.
Gurzad.
He shrieked, the final syllable rising in a shrill note of rapturous praise. A hideous, ecstatic grin stretched his lips, a look of someone who had just been told the ultimate punchline to a joke only madness could comprehend. He raised his arms wide, a vessel ready to offer himself to the abyss. His knees bent, his body tensing for the final, worshipful leap. A sound split the air, sharper than the thunder and closer than the howling wind. The percussive thump of armored feet hitting stone. It was a violent smear of motion that shot past the stunned professor, a crimson comet against the gloom. Rainwater sizzled and hissed off the knight's incandescent armor. In the fraction of a second, before Todd could throw himself into the void, the knight moved with impossible grace. He didn't draw his blade. In a single, fluid motion too fast to follow, he spun and struck, the weighted pommel of his sheathed sword connecting with Todd's temple with a dull, sickening thud. The alien litany died in Todd's throat, his eyes rolling back into his head as the knight's momentum carried them both in a controlled, skidding arc, stopping inches from the crumbling precipice. The knight's crimson armor, which seemed to drink the lightning and bleed it back out as a soft, internal glow, knelt in the mud. With a reverence that seemed completely at odds with the violence of his arrival, he cradled Todd's head and gently lowered him to the ground, a fallen acolyte saved at the very last moment. A wave of psychic pressure slammed into the clearing as the thing of mouths focused its rage. The hissing wasn't a single sound, but 1,000 overlapping whispers and shrieks, a dissonant chord of pure hatred that vibrated in the professor's bones. The very air grew thick and heavy, the rain seeming to fall in slow motion. It surged forward, a churning tide of flesh and teeth, its maddening chorus intensifying into a physical force designed to shatter the mind before the body. The knight did not roar. He planted his feet, the mud sucking at his crimson sabatons, and became a bastion of unwavering will. He raised his weapon, and the emerald blade ignited with a clean, humming tone that was the antithesis of the creature's chaos, a single, perfect note of order. This light pushed back against the psychic onslaught, creating a shimmering sanctuary around him. He met the charge not with brute force, but with impossible speed. His green blade became a ribbon of light, weaving a complex pattern in the air. He didn't just slash at the mass, he carved into it. The blade made no sound as it cut through the unnatural flesh, but a scream of cauterized reality hissed in its wake, leaving behind trails of shimmering emerald vapor. Where he struck, mouths sealed shut, bubbling into inert flesh. But for every mouth he silenced, 2 more writhed open, spitting curses that made the stones themselves tremble. The creature recoiled, not from pain, but from the sheer wrongness of the knight's ordered energy. It writhed, and a dozen fleshy pseudopods lashed out, attempting to ensnare him. The knight moved like a dancer in the storm, sidestepping and parrying the clumsy blows, his focus absolute. He saw his opening. In a fluid, practiced motion, he reversed his grip on the hilt. The green blade dimmed as he settled into a formal duelist stance, extending his sword backward for balance and aiming the pommel at the heart of the roiling mass. A gem set within it, previously dark, began to glow. It wasn't a sudden flash, but a hungry inhalation of energy, pulling motes of light and ambient magic from the air. A low hum started, quickly rising in pitch as tendrils of purple and blue lightning erupted from the knight's armor, crackling violently around him. He stood serene amidst the raging power, his voice cutting through the din with cold, absolute authority.
1,000 mouths, and not a single truth. Let me give your chorus a final note.
The instant the words were spoken, the world went silent. The creature's thousand-voiced shrieking, the howl of the wind, the crash of thunder, and even the drumming of the rain, all ceased. In that single, breathtaking moment of pure, ordered stillness, the professor could finally think clearly, the maddening noise replaced by a profound peace. Then the night unleashed the energy. The world inverted. Everything went stark white, rendering the night and the creature as absolute black silhouettes. A beam of pure purple void shot from the pommel. A silent, impossibly fast line drawn through the white stillness, connecting the night to the heart of the mass. The purple energy washed over it, and its form began to fray. It didn't dissolve, it was deconstructed. Each eye stared in vacant confusion, each mouth hung slack, and then mouth by mouth, eye by eye, it unraveled into strands of drifting, colorless dust. In seconds, the monstrous form was gone, leaving only the clean scent of ozone on the rain-washed air and a profound, ringing silence where its madness had been. The sudden silence was more deafening than the chaos it replaced. For a moment, the only sounds were the soft drumming of rain on stone and the sigh of the wind, sounds so exquisitely normal they felt like a blessing. Then a low groan cut through the quiet. Todd pushed himself onto his elbows, his skull feeling like a cracked bell. The alien syllables were gone, but a phantom echo remained, a cold, greasy residue in the back of his mind. Fragments of memory returned in a sickening rush. The professor's terrified face, the feel of his own hands gripping him, the ecstatic urge to offer him to the abyss. A cold dread washed over him.
Did I?
He whispered, his voice hoarse with shame, unable to finish the question.
No.
Professor Pocketbottom breathed, his voice trembling not with fear, but with an overwhelming, bone-deep relief.
You fought, and we were given aid.
He stumbled over to Todd, on straps, weak with adrenaline. With a tenderness that spoke volumes, Todd gently scooped the sentient rucksack up and settled him back into his familiar, secure place. For a moment, they just looked at each other, reaffirming a bond that had nearly been severed forever. Then they both turned to their savior. The knight stood with a serene and terrible grace, the rain forming a perfect, undisturbed curtain around his crimson armor. He sheathed his sword with a quiet, definitive click.
I am Kalen,
He said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with the calm authority of a mountain, cutting through the storm effortlessly.
What you heard was an axiom of madness. It does not just kill the body, it unrights the soul.
He gestured with a gauntlet toward the empty cliffside.
This place is a wound. Something bleeds its foulness into your world from just beyond the veil.
Kalen's helm tilted, and though they couldn't see his eyes, they felt his gaze measure them.
Your courage is notable. Your power is not. You are unequipped for the war that is coming.
The fragile peace was broken by a sound that did not belong, the slow, measured clap of a single pair of hands. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Kalen snapped into a defensive posture, but his movements were sluggish, heavy. A shimmer distorted the air near the cliff's edge, like heat rising from asphalt, and from this distortion, a figure resolved into being. He was dressed in the tattered, sigil-scribed robes of a scholar, but any sense of academic frailty was annihilated by the rest of him. A helm hid his face, its surface covered in etched runes that seemed to writhe in the gloom. From beneath his robes, thick, dark tendrils coiled and twitched with a life of their own. In one hand, he held a gnarled staff, topped with a cluster of skulls that wept a thin, black smoke. In the other, a piece of jagged, crystalline darkness smoldered.
Bravo,
The figure said, his voice a metallic filtered drone from behind the helm. The clapping stopped.
truly a masterful performance. You snuffed out a single discordant note. A fine accomplishment for a toddler who has just learned to blow out a candle.
Kalen's green blade, which had just ignited in his hand, flickered and died. He grunted, every plate of his crimson armor suddenly feeling as heavy as lead.
Azubora.
He growled, the name tasting like ash.
You remember me.
Azubora purred. The air grew thick, pressing down on them all. A network of faint, violet sigils bloomed on the wet stone around the party, pulsing with a light that seemed to drain all strength.
A shame you've learned so little since our last encounter. Still, the perfect soldier of a dying law.
The wizard turned his helmeted gaze to Todd, who flinched.
And you, little mage, you heard the music, didn't you? Touched the edges of the grand symphony.
Azubora's free hand curled into a fist.
Don't worry. The chorus still echoes in your soul. A seed of beautiful madness, waiting for the proper silence to bloom.
Finally, his attention fell upon Professor Pocketbottom.
Still clinging to your dusty axioms, old man.
Azubora tilted his head, the motion conveying a universe of pity and contempt.
Still trying to solve a chaotic cosmos with the tidy logic of a library. My master has shown me the final equation. It is vast and perfect, and has no room for the variable of you.
He took a slow step back towards the shimmering tear in reality. He hadn't drawn a weapon, yet he had defeated them utterly.
This world is but an instrument waiting to be tuned, and my master is a patient conductor.
Azubora said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper.
Enjoy your victory. It is the last you will ever have.
With that, he dissolved back into the distortion, which folded in on itself and vanished with a faint pop. The oppressive weight of the binding magic was gone, but the poison in Azubora's words remained, thick and suffocating. For a long moment, no one spoke. There was only the sound of the rain, a gentle, cleansing sound that could not wash away the filth that had just been spoken into their minds. Professor Pocketbottom finally broke the silence, his voice small.
Kalen, the war he spoke of.
But Todd wasn't listening. He was staring at his own hands, remembering the impossible strength they'd held. He could almost feel the phantom echo of the creature's song, a dissonant hum in the hollows of his soul. Azubora's promise, a seed of beautiful madness, had taken root. He looked up at his companions, a new terrible fear in his eyes. Was he a hero, or was he just a vessel waiting to be filled?